Stone does not dream. I know this because I have been stoned for 41 days, and in all of them I have not slept once. The curse holds me on my own throne, upright, eyes open but unseeing, lungs full of granite instead of air. I can feel everything. That is the cruelty of it. The seer made certain of that before she died. You will feel it all, Edric Voss, she whispered with blood on her teeth, her hand pressed flat to my chest. Every voice, every footstep, every woman they bring to you who is not the right one. You will know she is wrong and you will not be able to scream. She was right. I have screamed inside this stone 40 times. The first woman they brought was Ilara of the Ashwild pack, tall and perfumed and announced by horns. I felt her approach, the tap of her heeled boots, the swish of velvet, the heat of a torch her attendant carried too close to my frozen shoulder. When she laid her hand on mine, the stone did nothing. My wolf did nothing. She might as well have touched the wall. The second was Vess, a healer from Thornstand. Older, calmer, her fingers smelling of dried yarrow. She pressed her palm to the stone where my heart would be and whispered something I did not catch. Nothing. No warmth, no crack, no stir behind my ribs. The third, the fourth, the ninth, the 15th. Daughters of every wolf house from the Grapevine border to the southern marshes, everyone announced, everyone certain, everyone wrong. By the 20th, my council had stopped pretending this was anything but a siege. Breger, my steward, a man who had served my father and disliked me with the same quiet efficiency, stood at the foot of the throne each morning and read from his ledger. Candidate 21, Rella of Dunmore, age 24, bloodline verified. Verified, as though the bond were a pedigree. She touched the stone. Nothing. He drew a line through her name and called the next. Inside, I had begun to lose my bearings. Not my mind, the curse would not grant me that mercy, but my sense of proportion. A day felt the same as a week. The only clock I had was Breger's ledger and the changing slant of light through the great hall's narrow windows. Morning, cold blue on my left shoulder. Noon, a white stripe across my frozen lap. Evening, amber warmth I could sense but not absorb. And the wolves. The war wolves of Ironville are kept in the kennels 3 flights below the great hall. 16 of them, enormous gray and silver creatures bred for mountain patrol, not ornament. Most people in the Thornkeep are afraid of them. The wolves know this and tolerate it. They belong to no one, answer to no leash, and have served Ironville's alpha kings for 9 generations, not because they were trained to, but because they chose to. From inside my stone prison I could feel them. Not clearly, not as I could feel Breger's boot heel on the steps or the candidate's trembling hand, but as a low, steady pulse, like a second heartbeat set into the floor. 16 presences, warm and unhurried, turning in their dens far below. They did not know I was cursed. Or if they knew, they did not panic. There was a 41st presence among them, though I had not counted her at first. Lighter, quieter, steady in a different way, not the wolves' ancient patience, but something gentler, something that moved among them without hurry and without fear. I could feel her arrive before dawn and stay past dark. She spoke to them. I caught the shape of her voice through the stone, low and easy, the way you talk to an old friend you owed nothing. I did not know her name. I knew she smelled of pine resin and horse sweat, and the iron tang of the well water the wolves drank. I knew the wolves followed her footsteps the way a river follows its bed, not because it must, but because the channel was already worn and right. And I knew that when she was in the kennels, the pulse beneath my throne steadied, and for a few hours the stone felt less like a coffin and more like a chair I was merely sitting in, too tired to rise. Her name, I would learn later, was Dalakeen. She had no bloodline anyone had verified. Her father had been a farrier on the southern pass, dead when a horse kicked him the winter she turned 12. Her mother had been dead longer. She had come to the Thornkeep at 14, taken the only work no one else wanted, shoveling wolf dens, hauling water, checking the great beasts for ticks and thorns after patrol, and had done it without complaint or recognition for 7 years. 21 now. Brown-haired, calloused, quiet. The court saw her only when she crossed the kitchen yard with a bucket, and then they did not see her at all. I did not know any of this on day 41. I knew only the pulse and the voice, and the scent of pine resin traveling up through 3 flights of stone. Brieger climbed the steps that morning with his ledger pressed flat against his chest. I felt his weight on every stair. He was not a light man, and the scratch of his quill as he opened the book. Candidate 40, he announced. Merit of Cliven, age 19, bloodline verified. The hall stirred. I could feel the bodies of the court 30, perhaps 40, pressed against the walls in the cold half-light, their breath visible, their patience long since frayed. No one believed this would work anymore. They came out of duty and the thin hope that if the Alpha King crumbled to dust on his own throne, they might at least be present to fight over what was left. Merit of Cliven approached. Her footsteps were quick and sharp, nervous. She smelled of lavender oil, freshly applied, as though the curse might be charmed by a pleasant scent. Her hand touched the stone of my wrist. Nothing, not even the faintest stir. My wolf lay at the bottom of my mind like a stone himself, unmoved. Brieger drew the line. Merit withdrew. I heard her begin to cry as she reached the door, and one of her attendants whispered something I could not catch. 40 women, 40 lines through 40 names. Brieger closed the ledger and stood at the foot of the throne for a long time. I could feel his gaze on my frozen face, though I could not see it. I had not been able to see since the seer pressed her hand to my chest, and the granite climbed my body like ivy. There are no more candidates from the verified bloodlines, he said. The hall went silent. I could feel the cold settle deeper. There is the matter, Brieger continued, his voice flattened by the tone he used when he had already made a decision and was pretending to deliberate, of the unverified. Someone at the back of the hall, one of the lesser lords, I think, though I could not place the voice, said, "The curse specifies only his fated mate. Bloodline has nothing to do with it." Brieger did not respond to this directly. He never responded to things he found inconvenient. Instead, he said, "Then we expand the trial. Any unmated woman in the Thornkeep above the age of 18 will present herself in the hall tomorrow at dawn, including the staff." A murmur ran through the court. I felt it in the stone, a vibration, the way you feel a cart passing on a bridge. "Including the kitchen, the scullery, and the kennels," Brieger added, and the way he said it told me he considered this a waste of his ledger's ink. I do not know what happened in the Thornkeep that night. Inside my stone shell, the hours passed the way they always did, marked only by the shift of that pale stripe of light from my lap to the wall and then to darkness. The wolves settled below me. The 41st presence moved among them, and I felt her stop once, in the middle of the kennel, and stand very still for a long moment, as though she were listening to something I could not hear. Then she left. Her footsteps climbed 1 flight, toward the staff quarters on the lower hall, and vanished beyond my reach. Dawn came gray and iron cold. The mountains outside were lost in cloud and the hall filled early. I could feel them, dozens of bodies, more than had gathered for any single candidate. The staff had been roused and lined up along the east wall. I felt them in a tight cluster, their breathing shallow, their feet shifting on the stone. They did not want to be here. Brieger stood at his post and opened his ledger to a fresh page. "This is a courtesy, not a ceremony," he said. "You will approach one at a time. You will place your hand on the king's. You will step back. There will be no announcements." One by one they came. A cook whose hands were rough with flour and heat. A chambermaid whose pulse I could feel in her fingertips, racing. A seamstress. A washerwoman. An archivist's assistant who whispered an apology to me as she touched the stone, as though she were intruding. None of them stirred anything. My wolf did not lift his head. The stone remained whole. They moved quickly. Brieger was efficient when he wanted to be. I lost count somewhere around 15. The presences blurred. Hand after hand on the cold granite of my wrist. and each time the same hollowness, the same silence behind my ribs where the bond should have been. And then there was a pause, a gap in the procession long enough for me to feel the hall's restlessness shift into something sharper. Brieger's voice, "That's the last of them." Another voice, Jormund, my second commander, a decent man with no imagination. "There's one more." "The stable girl," Brieger said. He said it the way he might have said the slop bucket or the draft under the door. An object, a nuisance. "She tends the wolves." "She's the last unmated woman in the keep," Jormund said. "You said all." Brieger exhaled through his nose. I felt the air move across the stone of my cheek. "Bring her, then." I did not feel her enter the hall. That was the first strange thing. Every other person who had approached me in 41 days had announced themselves through the stone, a footstep, a shift in the air, a heartbeat I could track across the room. But Dalakeen moved the way the wolves moved, low, unhurried, placing her weight so the stone barely registered it. I felt her only when she was close, 3 paces, 2. Pine resin, well water, the iron scent of the kennels, and something beneath all of it, something I had no name for, something that made the granite around my ribs feel suddenly tight, as though the stone itself were trying to expand. "Go on," Brieger said, impatient. "Touch his hand and step back. We have business after this." She did not touch my hand. She touched my face. I know this because the stone there, the stone that had been numb and dead for 41 days, suddenly burned. Not with heat, with recognition, as though the granite had remembered what skin was and was furious at the difference. Her fingertips rested on my cheekbone. Her thumb touched the corner of my frozen mouth. She held them there and she said nothing, and the world inside the stone changed. My wolf lifted his head. Not slowly, not cautiously. He rose the way a creature rises when it catches a scent it has been waiting its whole life to find, head high, ears forward, every muscle locked. And from the base of my spine to the back of my skull, I felt the bond ignite. It was not a gentle thing. The bond did not whisper or murmur or hum. It cracked. It cracked the way a frozen river cracks in the first true thaw. One long, deafening split that runs from bank to bank, and then the water underneath roars through. The first fissure opened across my chest. I could not see it, but I felt it, a line of fire where the stone had been, air rushing in, the awful relief of something giving way. I heard the hall gasp. I heard Brieger take a step back, his boots scraping the flagstones. She did not pull her hand away. The second crack ran up my neck and across my jaw, and I felt her fingers, her real, warm, living fingers. Against the first inch of skin, the curse surrendered. The sensation was so sharp I would have wept if I had tear ducts. The third crack, the fourth. They spread outward from her hand like branches from a trunk, and with each one the stone lost its hold, my shoulder, my collarbone, the frozen muscles of my chest. Air filled my lungs for the first time in 41 days, and the sound I made was not a word. It was a gasp, the raw, involuntary gasp of a man who has been underwater too long and has broken the surface. The stone fell, great slabs of it, gray and veined, sliding off my arms and legs and shattering on the floor around the throne. My wolf surged forward inside me, not a howl, not a roar, but a shudder of pure recognition that shook my whole frame and sent a pulse through the floor that I knew the werewolves in the kennels would feel. I opened my eyes. She was standing in front of me. Brown hair pulled back with a strip of leather, hands rough and tanned, a stable hand's tunic, plain, patched at the elbow, a smear of wolf fur on the hem. She was looking at me the way the wolves look at a storm, without fear, without awe, with the calm, steady attention of a creature that has decided to stand exactly where it is. "Dalla," I said. I did not know how I knew her name. The bond knew. It had carried the knowledge through the stone the way water carries salt, invisibly, inevitably, all the way through. Her eyes widened. She had not expected me to know it. Behind her the hall was frozen, not by a curse, by shock. Brieger stood with his ledger open, his quills suspended in the air, a drop of ink forming at its tip and beginning to fall. The lesser lords lined the walls with their mouths open. The 40 women who had failed, or those who remained in the Thornkeep, waiting for the outcome, were visible in the doorway, and among them I saw Ilara of Ashweld, the first, the one who had been most certain, and her face was the face of a woman who is watching the world rearrange itself around something she cannot accept. I stood, the stone fragments ground under my boots. My legs had not held my weight in 41 days, and they trembled, but they held. "My king," Brieger began. I did not look at him. I looked at Dalla. She had taken a step back, not from fear, but from the simple, automatic reflex of a woman who has spent 7 years making room for others to pass. She was already disappearing, already making herself smaller, already preparing to be told it was a mistake. I reached out and took her hand. It was rough, calloused across the palm, scraped along the knuckles, a half-healed cut on the side of her thumb from a wolf's playful nip. It was the hand of a woman who had worked every day of her life without being thanked for it, and it was the hand that had just shattered a curse 40 high-born women could not touch. "This is my fated mate," I said. My voice was rusted. 41 days of silence had stripped it down to gravel and iron. But it carried. In the cold, vaulted hall of the Thornkeep, with the broken stone of the curse still scattered across the floor, it carried to every wall and every ear. No one moved. Brieger's quill drop hit his boot. The ink bloomed on the leather like a small dark flower. "Her name is Dalla Keen," I said. "She is my Luna, and she is the only reason I am standing here." The hall stayed silent. It was not the silence of reverence, not yet. It was the silence of a room that has not caught up with what it is witnessing. The stable hand, the kennel girl, the one Brieger had called last after every cook and chambermaid because he could not imagine her being worth the time. Dalla's hand was still in mine. She had not pulled it away, but she had not closed her fingers around mine either. She stood very still, looking up at me with those calm, steady eyes, and I could feel through the bond newly opened, raw as a wound, that she was not overwhelmed or flattered or afraid. She was deciding. She was deciding whether she believed me. I understood this. I had been a king who rejected the counsel of a dying seer, who stood unmoved while a woman bled at his feet and spent her last breath cursing him. Why should Dalla Keen believe the first pretty thing I said after 41 days of enforced silence? So I did not press. I held her hand gently, no grip she couldn't break, and I waited. The hall watched. Brieger watched. The wolves in the kennels, 3 flights below, waited too. I could feel their attention through the floor, 16 hearts beating in a unison they had not shown in weeks. "You know my name," Dalla said. Her voice was low and even, not awed, not trembling. The same voice I had heard from inside the stone, muffled through 3 flights of rock, speaking to wolves who already trusted her. "How?" "The bond," I said. "The bond," she repeated, as though tasting the word. "It carried your name through the stone, along with the scent of the pine resin you use on the wolves' joints, and the well water, and the sound of your voice, which was the only thing in 41 days that made the curse feel survivable." Something changed in her face. Not a softening, she was already soft in the way that strong things are soft, like leather that has been worked until it bends without breaking. It was a shift, a decision made behind her eyes. She closed her fingers around mine. The bond pulsed, not the violent crack of the curse breaking, but a warm, steady flare that ran from her hand through my wrist and up my arm, and settled in my chest like a coal finding its hearth. My wolf lay down inside me, not in submission, but in the deep, bone-level satisfaction of an animal that has finally reached the place it was walking toward. "All right," Dalla said. That was all. No pledge, no oath, no courtly declaration. All right. 2 words from a stable hand who had decided, on her own terms, that she would stay. Brieger recovered first. He always did. He was a man built for logistics, not wonder, and wonder confused him. My king, the protocols. A Luna must be presented formally, the bloodline must be verified, the council must. The bloodline, I said, was just verified. I pointed at the pile of shattered stone on the floor. By the curse. Brieger looked at the stone. He looked at Dalla. He looked at his ledger, where 40 lines had been drawn through 40 names and the 41st had not yet been written. He wrote it slowly. The quill scratched in the silent hall. Dalla Keen, he wrote, and then, after a pause that I could feel in the tension of his wrist, Luna. The first lord to bow was Jormund. This surprised no one. Jormund was a man of simple loyalties, and he had been the one to insist she be brought. He dropped to one knee at the edge of the hall, his fist over his heart, his head lowered. The gesture was plain, soldierly, and sincere. The second was Riva, the head of the mountain patrol, a woman who had known the werewolves longer than anyone except Dalla and who, I suspected, had already understood something the rest of the court had not. The third, fourth, fifth came in a wave. One by one, then in clusters, the court of Ironville bent. The lesser lords, the captains, the staff who had been lined along the east wall, the cook, the chambermaid, the seamstress, who knelt with the cautious relief of people who have witnessed a miracle and are not sure they are allowed to be glad about it. Ilara of Ashwell did not bow. She stood in the doorway with her velvet gown and her perfumed hair and watched. I did not blame her. She had come to Ironville certain that she was the answer, and certainty does not bend easily. But she did not leave either. She stood and watched, and something in her expression shifted from disbelief to something quieter, something that might, in time, become acceptance. I let her be. The curse had taught me something about patience I had not possessed before. Brieger was the last to bow. He closed his ledger, tucked it under his arm, and lowered himself stiffly, his knees protesting to one knee. His face, when I caught a glimpse of it, was not humble. It was calculating. He was already working out the logistics of a Luna with no bloodline, no household, and no wardrobe beyond a patched stable-hands tunic. I let him calculate. Brieger's calculating was how things got done in the Thornkeep, and Dalla would need things done. But not yet, not in that moment. In that moment I turned to her, my fated mate, my Luna, the woman whose touch had shattered a seer's dying curse, and I said, "You must be tired. You've been in the kennels since before dawn." She looked at me as though I had said something unexpected. Perhaps I had. Perhaps she had expected a king to speak of thrones and ceremonies, not of tiredness and kennels. "The wolves haven't been fed," she said. I laughed. It hurt, my throat was raw, my chest still ached where the stone had gripped it longest. But it was the first laugh I had managed in 41 days, and it echoed in the vaulted hall like a bell struck clean. "Then let's feed them," I said. I walked out of the great hall with Dalla Keen. Down the steps, through the lower corridors, past the kitchens where the cook stood open-mouthed with a ladle in her hand, down the final flight to the kennels where 16 werewolves were waiting. The wolves did not rise when I entered. They rose when she did. All 16 massive silver-gray creatures, scarred and heavy-shouldered, lifted their heads from their dens and oriented on her like compass needles finding north. Their tails did not wag. Wolves of this line do not wag. But their ears came forward, and their eyes tracked her with a calm, absolute focus that I recognized, because it was the same focus my own wolf had shown when the bond first cracked the stone. They had known before I did. They had known for 7 years. Dalla moved among them with the ease of long practice. She checked the water trough full and moved to the feed store, a stone alcove where dried meat and meal were kept in barrels. She worked without ceremony, filling the wooden troughs along the far wall, her hands quick and sure. One of the wolves, the largest, a scarred male I had never been able to approach without my alpha authority, pressed his broad head against her hip as she passed, and she scratched behind his ear without breaking stride. I stood in the doorway of my own kennels and watched, and the bond hummed between us like a low, constant note, and my wolf, who had spent 41 days at the bottom of my mind, silent and still as the stone that held me, rested his chin on his forepaws and closed his eyes. "You can come in," Dallas said without turning. "They won't hurt you, you're their alpha." "They like you better," I said. She glanced at me over her shoulder. There was the faintest shadow of a smile at the corner of her mouth, not a courtly smile, not a coy one, just the brief, natural warmth of a woman who has been paid a compliment she happens to agree with. "Yes," she said, "they do." I crossed the kennel floor. The wolves parted from me. They were bred to respect the alpha's presence, but their eyes stayed on Dalla. I stopped beside her at the feed trough and stood there, a king in a hall that smelled of pine resin and wolf fur and well water, watching a woman fill a wooden bowl with dried meat. "Dalla, Emma, you touched my face, not my hand." She paused, set the bowl down, straightened. "The others all touched your hand," she said. "I could see the marks on the stone, 40 sets of fingertips on the back of your right hand, worn smooth, like a path everyone takes because everyone else took it. So you chose differently." "I chose where I would touch someone I was trying to reach," she said. "If a wolf is frozen in fear, you don't grab its paw, you touch its face. You let it know you see it." I had been a king for 12 years. I had commanded armies, brokered alliances, held the northern passes against 3 incursions from the Grapevine Raiders. No one in that time had ever looked at me and thought, "He is frightened. He needs to know someone sees him." She had. From 3 flights below, through stone and silence, the woman who fed my wolves had seen what no one else could. Not my power, not my crown, not my bloodline, my fear. "Thank you," I said. The words were inadequate. 2 syllables for 41 days of darkness and the hand that ended them. But I said them, and I meant them, and Dalla Keene heard them the way she heard everything, steadily, without performance, with the quiet attention of someone who listens because listening matters, not because it is expected. She nodded, picked up the bowl, went back to work. I stayed. I did not summon Brieger for the protocols. I did not return to the great hall where the court was waiting. I stayed in the kennels with my Luna and the 16 werewolves of Ironville, and for the first time in 41 days, I was warm. The days that followed were not simple. I will not pretend they were. Brieger's logistics, as it turned out, were considerable. A Luna with no household required one. A Luna with no wardrobe required that too, though Dalla resisted this with a stubbornness that surprised even the seamstress, who was accustomed to difficult fittings. "I need clothes I can work in," Dalla told her. "I'm not standing in the great hall all day." "You are the Luna," the seamstress said, bewildered. "You will stand in the great hall." "I'll stand where the wolves are," Dalla said, and that, for the time being, was the end of it. The court adjusted. This is what courts do, they adjust with varying degrees of grace to whatever new reality their king presents. The lesser lords who had bowed in the hall on the morning of the breaking were polite. Some were curious. A few were warm. Rivat, the patrol captain, brought Dalla a pair of mountain boots, her own spare pair, lined with wolf fur, and said, "The Thornkeep's floors are cold. These will help." Dalla wore them. I noticed. I noticed everything about her now. The bond saw to that. The way she braided her hair when she worked. The scar on her left wrist from a wolf pup's teething years ago. The way she spoke to the wolves in a low, constant murmur that was not baby talk or command but something between a conversation, as though the wolves were colleagues she respected. I noticed, too, the way she held herself when we were in the great hall together. Not stiffly. She was not a woman who stiffened, but watchfully. Alert in the way of someone who has spent years reading a room to know whether she is welcome in it. She did not presume. She did not posture. She stood beside me at the long table and ate with the court and answered questions when they were asked and offered nothing when they were not. This troubled me. Not because she was doing anything wrong, she was doing everything right, with a natural dignity that put the court's trained manners to shame, but because the watchfulness was old. It was the watchfulness of a woman who had learned, long before the curse, long before me, that the safest thing to be was unnoticed. I spoke to her about it on the 5th evening. We were in the kennels. We spent most evenings there, which exasperated Brieger and pleased the wolves, and she was brushing down the scarred male, whose name, I had learned, was Rost. "You're careful in the hall," I said. "Careful. You watch before you speak. You sit in the chair closest to the door. You eat only after someone else has started." She paused mid-stroke. Rost turned his great head and looked at me with an expression that said, quite clearly, "You interrupted the brushing." "I've always done that," Dallas said. "I know, I'm asking why." She set the brush down. Rost grumbled. She rested her hand on his neck and the grumble subsided. "Because when you're the one no one remembers," she said, "you learn to take up as little space as possible. It's not fear, it's practice. You move quietly, you eat after the cook has taken what she wants, you sit where you can leave without being seen. It keeps things smooth. And if I told you, I want you to take up space." She looked at me. Her eyes, in the torchlight of the kennel, were the color of pine bark, dark and warm and steady. "Then I'd need to practice something different," she said. "Will you?" She considered this. It was one of the things I had already come to love about her. She did not answer quickly when the question mattered. She gave it weight. She turned it over, the way she might turn a wolf's paw to check for thorns, with attention and without rush. "Yes," she said, "but not all at once, and not because you told me to, because I've decided." I understood. Choice was the foundation of this, of us, of the bond, of everything the curse had broken open. She had chosen to touch my face. She had chosen to stay. She would choose to take up space in the hall, on her own terms, in her own time, and my role was not to command it but to hold the door open. "All right," I said, her word. The word she had given me in the great hall when she closed her fingers around mine. I used it now the same way, not as a concession, but as a recognition. "I see you. I trust your choosing." She picked up the brush. Rost settled. The kennels were quiet except for the sounds of wolves breathing and Dallas' steady strokes. And outside the narrow window, the mountains of Ironville stood against a sky full of early stars. On the 9th day, the mate mark appeared. I had not expected it. The old texts, the ones Brieger kept in the archive, leather-bound and dusty and largely unread, spoke of the mate mark as a rare sign of a bond so complete that the wolf magic manifested physically. Most mated pairs never received one. It was not required. It was a grace, not a guarantee. It appeared on her wrist, the left one, just above the scar from the wolf pup's teeth. A narrow band of silver light, like a thread woven under the skin, that pulsed when I was near and dimmed when I moved away. It did not hurt. She told me this plainly. Examining it in the morning light with the same calm, practical attention she gave to a wolf's paw or a fraying rope. "Does yours match?" she asked. I pushed my sleeve up. There on my left wrist was the mirror, the same silver thread, pulsing in the same rhythm. She touched it. The mark flared, both of them, hers and mine. A sudden wash of silver light that filled the space between us like a held breath released. Rost, lying at our feet, lifted his head and then lowered it again, satisfied. The wolves, I was beginning to realize, had no patience for ceremonies. They had known the bond was real from the first day, and the mark was simply the world catching up. "It's warm," Dallas said, tracing the line on my wrist with her thumb. "Yes." "Good," she said. "The thornkeep is cold." The mark did something else, though, something I had not anticipated and the old texts had not warned me of. It told the court what words and bowing and Brieger's ledger could not. That the bond between the Alpha King of Ironville and the woman who had been his stable hand was not a fluke, not a mistake, not a moment of cursed desperation, but the real and ancient thing. They saw it first in the hall when Dalla reached for a cup and the silver thread caught the candlelight. Conversation stopped. Every head turned. I watched the court's faces, the curiosity, the surprise, the slow dawning of something that looked, in the better among them, like respect. Rivet, who had given Dalla the mountain boots, crossed the hall and asked to see the mark. Dalla held out her wrist. Rivet examined it, then looked at me, then looked back at Dalla. "I've served 3 Alpha Kings," Rivet said. "None of them bore the mark." "None of them had her," I said. Rivet nodded, as though this settled something she had long suspected, and returned to her seat. The shift in the court was not sudden. It was a tide, slow, steady, pulled by a gravity that had nothing to do with decree and everything to do with the simple, visible proof that the bond was real. The lesser lords stopped watching Dalla from the corners of their eyes and began watching her directly, and what they saw, the calm, the steadiness, the quiet competence of a woman who had managed 16 werewolves for 7 years without a single incident, was difficult to dismiss. Even Brieger softened. Not visibly, Brieger's exterior remained as unyielding as the Thornkeep's walls, but in practice. He began consulting Dalla on matters of the household, first with reluctance, and then with something approaching relief, as though he had been carrying a weight alone and had found someone willing to take the other end. "The stores for winter," he told her one afternoon, standing in the kitchen corridor with his ledger open. "The usual estimate is 90 barrels of grain, 40 of salt meat, 20 of root vegetables. Is that sufficient for the wolves as well?" Dalla looked at him. She had not expected to be asked. "The wolves eat differently in winter," she said. "They need more fat. Add 10 barrels of rendered tallow and double the salt meat, and they'll make it to spring without losing condition." Brieger wrote this down without comment. 10 barrels rendered tallow, double salt meat, and then, so quietly I almost missed it, good. On the 12th evening, I asked Dalla to walk with me. Not to the kennels, she walked there every day, and it was her territory, not mine. I took her up, past the great hall, past the archive, past the council chamber, to the highest point of the Thornkeep, the watchtower that looked out over the western pass, where the mountains of Ironville fell away into a deep valley filled with pine forest and the distant silver thread of the Voss River. She had never been up here. Stable hands do not climb watchtowers. She stood at the parapet and looked out, and the wind lifted her hair, still tied back with the leather strip, still practical, still Dalla, and for a long time she said nothing. "This is what you see," she said finally. "When I'm not looking at stone from the inside, yes." She did not smile at this. She turned and looked at me, and her expression was not awed by the view or moved by the moment or any of the things I might have hoped for. It was the expression of a woman who is fitting a new piece into a picture she has been assembling for a long time. "You were afraid," she said, "in the stone." "Yes." "Not of dying." "No, of being conscious and unable to reach anyone, of hearing the wolves and knowing I could not go to them, of being present and useless." She nodded. "That's why you come to the kennels every evening." It was not a question. It was a reading, the same way she read the wolves, not by what they showed but by what they did. "Yes," I said, "and because you're there." "I'm there because the wolves need me." "I know, but I need you too." She looked at me. The wind pressed her tunic flat against her shoulders, and the mate mark on her wrist pulsed silver in the fading light. Below us, the valley darkened. The pines were black. The river was a faint gleam. "I know you do," she said. "That's why I stay." Not for the title, not for the court, not for the wardrobe the seamstress was still trying to force on her. She stayed because the man who had been stoned for 41 days needed the same thing the wolves needed. Someone who would show up before dawn and stay past dark, steady and present and unafraid. I took her hand. She let me. We stood at the top of the Thornkeep and watched the stars come out over Ironville, and neither of us spoke, because the bond was saying everything, a low, constant warmth between our wrists, silver and sure. On the 20th day, I held the formal bonding ceremony. Brieger had lobbied for it since the morning of the breaking. Protocols exist for a reason, my king. The other packs must see the rite performed. And I had delayed as long as I reasonably could, because Dalla had made it clear that she found ceremonies pointless and uncomfortable, and because I had spent enough time on a throne to know the difference between a rite that means something and one that performs. But Brieger was right. The packs needed to see it, not for their sake, for Dalla's. Without the formal rite, there would always be a whisper she was just a stable hand. The curse was confused. He was desperate. So we held it. The great hall was fuller than it had been on the morning of the breaking. Word had traveled to the Ashweld and Thornstand and Cliving packs, to the Grapevine border holds, to the marshland dens of the south. They came, lords and ladies and commanders and wolves, filling the Thornkeep's hall until the ancient stones groaned with the weight of it. Dalla wore a dress. This was, in its own way, as remarkable as the breaking of the curse. The seamstress, whose name was Leda, and who had been quietly brilliant all along, had made something that honored both the Luna's station and the woman's nature. A gown of deep gray wool, simple in cut, warm, with long sleeves and a high collar, and a single line of silver stitching at the cuffs that echoed the mate mark. It was a dress you could kneel in to check a wolf's paw. It was a dress a queen could stand in before a hall of lords. Dalla looked down at herself and said, "It doesn't itch." "High praised," I said. "It is," she said, and there was the smile, the real one, the one she gave the wolves and now sometimes me. The rite was simple. Ironville's bonding rite has always been simple, older than the ornate ceremonies of the southern packs, older than the Thornkeep itself. The Alpha and his Luna stand face to face. He speaks her name. She speaks his. They press their wrists together left to left, where the mark lives, and if the bond is true, the marks flare and the wolves acknowledge. We stood at the center of the hall. The court pressed in on every side, a wall of faces, some familiar, some foreign, all watching. Brieger stood to my right with his ledger closed for once. Jormund stood at the door, his hand on his sword out of habit, his face the same simple, honest map it always was. I looked at Dalla, she looked at me. The hall was silent. "Dalla Keen," I said. "Edric Voss," she said. I held out my left wrist. She held out hers. The silver marks pulsed once, twice, and then when our skin met they blazed. The light filled the hall. Not the violent crack of the curse breaking, but a steady, rising glow, silver-white, warm, pouring from our joined wrists like water from a spring. It lit the stone walls. It lit the faces of the court. It lit the rafters where Ironville's old banners hung, faded and proud. And from beneath the floor, 3 flights below, through stone and silence, the war-wolves answered. Not a howl. Wolves of the Ironville line do not howl. What they do is deeper. A sound like the mountain itself is breathing. A resonance that begins in the chest and moves through the stone and rises until it fills every room in the Thornkeep. 16 voices, joined, unwavering, acknowledging the bond they had sensed 7 years before the rest of us caught up. The court heard it. Every face changed. This was not a protocol or a rite or a political arrangement. This was the wolves of Ironville who answered to no command, declaring that the stable hand was their Luna. Rival was the first to bow again, then Jormund. Then the lesser lords, the visiting commanders, the ladies of the allied packs, a spreading wave, wider this time, deeper, carrying with it the weight of the wolves' endorsement. Brieger bowed. He held it longer this time, and when he rose, his face held something I had never seen on it before. Not calculation, not logistics, something older, something that looked, against all probability, like faith. In the doorway, half hidden by the crowd, I saw Ilara of Ashweld. She had stayed. 20 days she had stayed, and I had not asked why, and she had not explained. But now, as the hall bowed and the wolves' resonance faded into the stones, she lowered her head. It was not a deep bow. It was not a grand gesture. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement from a woman who had come to Ironville certain of her own destiny, and had been forced to watch it given to someone else. But she gave it, and it was real, and I honored it by not staring. The mark on my wrist dimmed as Dalla and I separated our hands, but it did not go dark. It stayed, a faint silver line, warm, constant, the way the bond itself was constant. "Well," Dalla said, looking out at the bowing hall, "that was loud." I laughed again. The sound was easier now, my throat had healed, my chest no longer ached, and it felt natural, as though I had always been a man who laughed in the middle of ceremonies. I had not been, the curse had changed me. No, Dalla had changed me. The curse had only made me still enough to notice. The weeks after the bonding rite settled into a rhythm that belonged to Dalla as much as to me. She did not give up the kennels, I had not expected her to, and I would not have asked. She rose before dawn, pulled on the mountain boots Riva had given her, and went down to the wolves. She fed them, checked their paws and joints, ran her hands along their ribs and shoulders, murmured to them in the low, steady voice that had traveled through 3 flights of stone and reached me in my prison. But she also sat in the council sessions. This was her own decision made on the 14th day, announced to no one, executed by simply walking into the chamber and taking the chair nearest the window. Brieger looked at her. She looked at him. He opened his ledger. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was with the precision of a woman who had spent 7 years managing a population of creatures that could kill her if she misread them. And the council learned quickly that this precision was transferable. "The patrol routes through the Western Pass," she said one morning, tracing the map Brieger had spread on the table. "You have them running the same line every 3 days. The wolves are bored. They're cutting corners on the northern switchback because they've memorized it." Riva, sitting across the table, went very still. "How do you know this?" Riva asked. "Because when they come back from the northern switchback, they're not tired," Dalla said. "A wolf that's run a real patrol is tired. These wolves are restless. They're playing with each other in the kennel by noon. Change the route weekly, vary the elevation, add a creek crossing, send them through the birch grove instead of the pines. They'll work harder if the ground is new." Riva looked at me. I said nothing. Riva looked back at Dalla. "The birch grove is harder terrain," Riva said. "The wolves are harder creatures," Dalla said. "They want to be challenged. They've been telling you this for months." Riva changed the routes. The patrol reports improved within a week. I watched all of this, my Luna's quiet integration into the structures of Ironville, with a pride I did not fully trust. Not because I doubted her, but because pride, in my experience, was the first step toward complacency, and the curse had taught me that complacency was the thing I could least afford. The seer's words still lived in me. "You will feel it all, Edric Voss." She had meant the stone, but the stone was gone now, and I still felt it all, the bond's warmth, the wolves' contentment, Dalla's steady presence 3 flights below, the slow, uncertain turning of a court that was learning to follow a Luna who did not perform but simply worked. On the 30th evening, Dalla asked me about the seer. We were on the watchtower. It had become our place, the one space in the Thornkeep that was neither the hall's public stage nor the kennel's working floor. The mountains were blue with dusk, and the first stars were sharp above the Western Pass. "Tell me about her," Dalla said. "The seer." "Yes, Brieger won't talk about it. Jormund says he doesn't know the details. The archive has one entry and it's in Brieger's handwriting and it says, 'The seer Margade cursed the king.' Cause, unspecified. Brieger's handwriting is very informative when it wants to be, and it does not want to be about this." I leaned against the parapet. The stone was cold against my back. Below, the Thornkeep's lights were coming on in torches in the windows, the warm glow of the kitchens, the faint flicker of the kennel's brazier. "Her name was Margade," I said. "She came to the Thornkeep 8 weeks before the curse. She had traveled from the Grapevine border 3 days through the passes, alone in winter. She was dying. She knew it. She asked to speak with me. And I refused. I was occupied. There was a border dispute with the Ashweld pack and a supply chain that had broken in the Eastern Valley, and Brieger was pressing me about the winter stores. The seer could wait, I told Jormund. I would see her when I had time. You didn't have time. I didn't make time. She waited 6 days. On the 7th, she collapsed in the lower corridor. One of the kitchen staff found her. By the time Jormund brought her to me, she was bleeding from the mouth and could barely stand. I paused. The memory was not comfortable. It had not been comfortable inside the stone either, where I had replayed it daily, unable to do anything except feel the shame of it settle deeper. She told me she had seen the fall of Ironville, not a military defeat, a withering. The kingdom growing cold from the inside, the wolves losing their bond, the alpha line breaking. She said the only prevention was the mate bond, the true one, not a political match. She said it with the last strength she had, and she wept as she said it, and I told her I had heard enough prophecies to fill a library and none of them had been worth the paper. Dalla said nothing. She watched me the way she watched the wolves, without judgment, without hurry, with the attention of someone who knows that the important part is never the first sentence. She cursed me then, I said, not out of malice, out of desperation, I think. She had traveled 3 days to deliver a warning, and the king she delivered it to had made her wait 6 days and then dismissed her. The curse was not revenge. It was the last tool she had. Only his fated mate can break it, Dalla said. Yes, she made the cure the very thing I had refused to seek. And then she died on my hall floor, and I stood there, uncursed for another hour, long enough to feel the full weight of what I had done before the stone began to climb my feet. The stars brightened above us. The wind moved through the tower. Dalla reached out and took my hand, the same gesture I had made in the great hall on the morning of the breaking, but reversed now, offered by her on her terms. You were wrong, she said, about the seer, about the prophecy, about what was worth your time. Yes. And the curse taught you that. The curse taught me that power without attention is just noise. I had the throne, the wolves, the kingdom, and I could not see the one thing that mattered because I was too busy counting the things that didn't. The border dispute, Dalla said, resolved itself within a week. The supply chain was fixed by Rivat. The winter stores were Brieger's problem, not mine. Everything I put ahead of Margate was something someone else could have handled. And Margate. Only I could have listened to, and I didn't. Dalla was quiet for a long time. The wind pressed her hair against her cheek. The mate mark on her wrist pulsed softly, a heartbeat of silver in the dark. I tend the wolves, she said, because no one else wanted to. Not because it was beneath them, it was, in their eyes, but because no one saw the wolves the way I did. Everyone saw dangerous animals that needed managing. I saw 16 creatures that needed someone to pay attention to what they were actually saying. And what were they saying? The same thing Margate was saying. The same thing the stable hand on the lowest floor of the Thornkeep was saying every time she shoveled a den and checked a paw and talked to a wolf in the dark. We are here. We matter. See us. I tightened my hand around hers. The bond flared, not silver light but warmth, deep and steady, the kind that settles into bone and stays. I see you, I said. I know, she said. That's why the stone broke. The 40th day after the breaking was ordinary. That was what made it remarkable. I held council in the morning. Dalla attended, sitting by the window with a cup of tea and the patrol reports she had begun reviewing with Rivat. Brieger read from his ledger stores accounted for, border agreements renewed, a request from the Cliving Pack for a winter trade route through the Eastern Valley. I listened, decided, moved on. The kingdom worked. At noon, Dalla went to the kennels. I did not follow her. I had a meeting with the visiting Thornstand commander about the spring patrols, but I felt her go. Not through the bond's silver thread, though that was there always, warm and constant. I felt her the way I had felt her from inside the stone, a presence that moved through the thornkeep like a current through water, quiet and deep and necessary. In the afternoon, I walked the walls with Jormund. The mountains were beginning to show their autumn colors, gold in the birch groves, dark red along the ridgelines, the pines unchanged and steady. The air was cold and clear, and the western pass was open, and for the first time in months, the view from the walls did not carry the memory of stone. "You're different," Jormund said. "Is that a complaint?" "An observation. Before the curse you gave orders. Now you ask questions. Before, you filled the council room with your voice. Now you leave space for others to fill it." "The stone will do that," I said. "I don't think it was the stone," Jormund said. He looked down at the kennel entrance where Dalla was visible, crossing the yard with a feed bucket and the scarred wolf Rost pacing at her side. "I think it was her." I did not argue. There was nothing to argue with. In the evening, we were in the kennels. This is where the day ended every day, without exception, without ceremony. Dalla and I and the 16 wolves of Ironville, in the stone den beneath the hall, with the brazier burning and the smell of pine resin and the low, deep breathing of creatures at rest. Dalla was seated on the straw-covered floor, her back against the wall, Rost's enormous head in her lap. She was reading a patrol manual she had borrowed from Rivat, because she intended to understand the routes well enough to redesign them properly. One of the younger wolves, a female named Sif, smaller and quicker than the rest, with pale gray fur and amber eyes, had curled herself against Dalla's right side and was asleep. I sat across from her. The brazier crackled between us. The mate mark on my wrist pulsed in time with hers, and the bond was quiet, not dim, not fading, just settled. The way a river is quiet when it reaches the flatlands, still moving, still deep, but no longer fighting the grade. "Dalla." She looked up from the manual. "The seer said the kingdom would wither if the alpha line broke. She said the mate bond was the prevention." "Yes." I thought she meant a political match, a strong alliance. I thought the bond was a strategy. "What do you think now?" I looked at her, at the patrol manual in her calloused hands, at the wolf in her lap, at the silver mark on her wrist, at the steady, unperformative warmth of a woman who had walked into a cursed king's prison and touched his face because that was how you reach something that was afraid. "I think the bond is not a strategy," I said. "I think it is the opposite. I think it is the thing that happens when you stop strategizing and start paying attention." Dalla closed the manual. She looked at me across the brazier, and her eyes held the firelight the way the pine resin held the scent of the forest, deeply, naturally, without trying. 40 women failed," she said. "Yes." "Not because they weren't good enough. Because they approached the curse the way everyone approaches a king, with performance, with the right bloodline and the right dress and the right words. And you?" "I approached you the way I approach a frightened wolf," she said. "I touched your face, I was quiet, I let the bond decide." I reached across the brazier's warmth and rested my hand on Rost's broad shoulder. The wolf did not stir. Sif shifted in her sleep, pressing closer to Dalla's side. "Stay," I said, not a command. A request, offered the way all my requests to her were offered, open-handed, ready to be refused, trusting her to choose. "I'm not going anywhere, Edric," she said. "I never was. You just had to stop being stone long enough to notice." The brazier burned down to coals. The wolves breathed. Dalla returned to her manual, and I sat in the kennels of my own kingdom, a king who had been cursed and broken and remade, watching the woman who had done the remaking by the simple, extraordinary act of seeing what was actually there. Above us the thornkeep settled into night. The torches dimmed. The mountain wind moved through the corridors, and on my wrist the mate mark pulsed, steady, silver, warm, matching hers, beat for beat, the way it would for the rest of our lives. In the morning, the wolves would run the new routes through the birch grove, and Dalla would stand at the kennel gate and watch them go, and I would stand beside her, and Brieger would find us there when he came looking for a signature, and he would sigh and wait and write in his ledger. The king is with the Luna. The wolves are running well. There are worse things for a kingdom's record to hold. And there are worse things for a king to be remembered for than this, that the curse broke, not because of his power or his bloodline or his throne, but because a woman who fed his wolves touched his face in the dark and whispered nothing at all, and it was enough. It was more than enough, it was everything.